What's up YouTube, Saf here on Super Saf TV, and in this video I'm going to be comparing the specs of the Nikon D7100 to the Nikon D600. The D7100 is the latest DX-format DSLR from Nikon, and it's aiming at the intermediate level photographer. Sits just before the full frame lineup, which begins with the Nikon D600. Now, a lot of people have been asking me what are the differences between these two, and if you're going to be going for the high spec DX-format DSLR from Nikon, why not just spend a little bit more and go for the cheapest full frame FX format DSLR from Nikon? So obviously that's a very valid question, and we're going to try to answer that here by putting these two cameras head to head and looking at the differences in terms of specs between these two. So let's start off with megapixels and sensor size. Now the D600 24.3 megapixels, the D7100 24.1 megapixels. Now although in terms of megapixels they may not seem to be, have a large difference, the big difference between these two cameras is obviously the sensor size. The D600 has a full frame FX format sensor, whereas the D7100 has a DX format crop sensor. Now obviously a full frame sensor is going to give you generally going to give you better low light performance, and it's going to give you the exact focal length that you're using on a lens. So for instance, if you're using a 50mm lens on the D600, your focal length will be 50mm. However, on the D7100, using a 50mm lens on there is going to give you about a 1.5 times crop on that lens. So you're looking at around about 75mm on the DX crop because it's a smaller sensor. So the D600 has roughly about a 50% larger sensor to the D7100. Now the D7100, however, does not have an optical low pass filter. Now what that basically means is, generally speaking, most DSLRs have an optical low pass filter. What this does is sort of reduces moire and stuff in textures on clothing, etc., and it also blurs the image very slightly to sort of avoid that. Now by not having this, the D7100 is generally going to give you sharper and more crisp images, and they're saying that because of the high megapixel count, the moire shouldn't be that much of an issue, and you can always sort that out in post as well. So that's very, very interesting there. Looking at autofocus, the D600 39-point AF system with 9 crossed-out points, the D7100 51 AF system with 15 cross-type sensors. Now obviously because this is the full frame and this is the DX crop, you'd expect the autofocus points to be switched here, and but the D7100 does have more autofocus points. It's a new camera, and Nikon have incorporated that into the camera. So you've got 51 autofocus points. So obviously an advantage here for the Nikon D7100. Looking at the ISO range, both have between 100 to 6400, extendable to 25,600. However, as I mentioned, a full frame will give you better low light performance because you've got a larger sensor. It's going to be capturing more light. You're going to get a better performance, and obviously we're going to have to see that in live, side by side. So if we do get the cameras in, we'll do a hands-on and we can compare the images side by side in terms of the low light performance. Continuous shooting, the D600 5.5 frames a second continuous shooting, the D7100 6 frames per second at the full resolution, but you've also got a 1.3 times DX crop on which you can get 7 frames a second. So it's going to be really, really useful for sports photography, etc. Now to explain the crop to you as well, the D600 comes with a 1.5 times crop. So if you wanted to shoot cropped in, it's going to be a 1.5 times crop DX format on the D600. The D7100 is already a crop lens, but it's going to give you a further option of 1.3 times crop. So to put that into perspective, a 50mm lens on the D7100 would have been 75mm, but with the additional 1.3 times crop, you're going to be getting roughly 97.5mm, so that almost doubled your focal length. Although the resolution is going to drop slightly, somewhere around 15 megapixels, obviously you're going to lose a third of that roughly, but you're going to be able to really crop in. On video, you're still going to be able to film 1080p at that crop mode, but when you're doing like macro shots and stuff, that's going to be very, very useful to really, really get it in. I mean, you're getting double your focal length, so that's another very, very useful feature. Obviously on the D600, you're going to get a certain amount of crop, but that's only going to let you crop up to the format that the D7100 is at. The D7100 gives you that step further. Max shutter speed, the D600 1/4000th of a second, the D7100 1/8000th of a second. So again, the D7100 exceeds in this feature. The flash sync speed as well, D600 1/200th of a second, the D7100 1/250th of a second. So obviously there's a lot of these features that the D7100 is sort of advancing in, because obviously it's a new camera, so I believe that's why they've sort of packed some of these new features in there. Viewfinder, both are going to give you 100% coverage at the full resolution. The D600, if you are using the DX crop, it's going to give you 97% coverage, but generally speaking 100% coverage for your general shots. In terms of the screen, the LCD screen, both have a 3.2-inch screen. However, the D7100 has a 1229K screen, whereas the D600 has a 921K dot screen. So basically you got more pixels in the same amount of space. So the PPI for the Nikon D7100 is going to be higher, so you're going to get more crisper images. You're going to be able to see better images on the back of the screen because you've got more pixels crammed in a smaller space. The card slots both have dual SD card slots. Obviously very advantageous. You've got overflow on backup storage on these that you can use. Generally speaking, DX-format DSLRs don't have this, but the D7100 does, because again it's going for that intermediate photographer. So again, another useful feature. Looking at video, the D600 1080p at 24, 25 and 30 frames a second, 720 at 50 and 60 frames per second. The D7100 also does this, but you've got the additional option of going to 1080i at 50 and 60 frames a second. Again, another advantage here, because you've got 1080, fair enough, it's 1080i, not 1080p, but you can shoot up to 50 or 60 frames a second, which is pretty useful. Moving on, max recording length in terms of video. The D600, 20 minutes at full HD. The D7100, 29 minutes and 59 seconds. So the D7100 is going to let you record for about 50% longer than the D600 is. So again, another advantage here for the D7100. Both of these cameras also can give you a clean uncompressed HDMI feed using the HDMI port, and you can export that to an external recording device. Obviously a very must-have feature for professional video pros out there who want that amazing quality video direct to an external hard drive rather than recording in the camera. Mic input and headphone out. Both of these cameras have mic in and headphone out, obviously must-haves for videographers out there. And looking at the size and weight, the D7100 675 grams, the D600 760 grams. So obviously slightly in terms of the weight, the D7100 is slightly lighter, only about 85 grams, but it's also smaller. The D600 is larger in height, width and depth slightly. So the D7100 is a little bit more compact. Wireless transfer, both you can get an additional wireless adapter, and this is optional, so it doesn't actually come, but it's only about 50-60 pounds, both similarly priced. The D600 uses a WU1B wireless mobile adapter. The D7100 uses a WU1A, so slightly different, but they're priced very similarly. Now what these are going to allow you to do, literally plug them into the DSLR, and they're going to let you transfer the images onto a mobile device, a tablet or a mobile phone, and it's also going to let you have certain controls over the camera via your mobile or tablet as well. So very useful there as well. Looking at price, now price is obviously the interesting point here. The D600 currently, I mean, places like Amazon, you can get it between 1,400 to 1,450 pounds. Really competitive there for a full frame DSLR, I must say, and around about $2,000 in the US. The D7100 is going to be coming initially at around about £1,100 or $1,200. Now obviously in terms of pounds, you've only got a difference of about £350, so not a huge deal of difference there. And the D7100 is going to be from sale late March, 21st of March is what they're saying. So to summarize, obviously both have their advantages, great DSLRs, but to answer the big question, which one to go for? Now, overall, the D7100 does have more advantages. I mean, more general advantages, looking at like more autofocus point, faster continuous shooting, as well as more video options and longer recording length, 1080i for instance. So the D600, what does that have? Well, it has a full frame sensor. Now, although it may not seem like a big advantage, having a full frame sensor is a massive advantage. You're going to be getting the exact focal length. You're going to be having all the advantages of a full frame sensor, and it is a pro feature. I mean, you know, if you want to really get into the pro photography, then obviously you want to go for a full frame sensor. Personally, you know, I think it comes down to personal preference, but if you were to ask me, I would personally go for the D600 based on current pricing right now, because there is not much of a price difference between the D600 and the D7100. So personally, right now at this point, if I had the choice, if I was choosing between these two cameras, I would go for the D600 based on the fact that you've got a full frame sensor at not much of a higher price. Having said that, the D7100 price will drop undoubtedly. The D600, when it initially released, was about £2,000. Now it's dropped. I mean, you've got more than a 25% drop in price, you know, over 6 months. So the D7100 no doubt will drop over the next few months. So maybe at a later point it will be a more viable option to go for the D7100. But that's my opinion anyway. What do you think? Drop me a comment below. Let me know, which one would you go for? Would you go for the D600 or would you go for the D7100? But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. It really does help me out. And why not subscribe to the channel? I've got plenty more videos coming up on here. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on Super Saf TV, and I'll see you next time.